All right, what's up, y'all? Wes Mitchell here, Chris Clark, rolling right along. Man, I tell you, Chris, when you get into a season, I feel like you just get in a rhythm. You just get rolling. You're focused on one game. Then you just got to turn the page, man. Just got to move on. Got to start talking Mizzou. The beauty of the game of football is you get a unique challenge, I feel like, every single week. Most of the time, very, very different. And most of the time, it's something new to talk about. So, of course, Shane Beamer today quickly turning the page to Missouri as South Carolina looks to, in some ways, if you look at like the now, the here, this team, it's about, Chris, continuing momentum. If you zoom out and look at this series against Missouri, look at how this game has played out the last few years, really the last 5 years, and it's about stopping a trend of just not playing well at all against this Missouri program. And so that's what we're going to talk about today as we roll into GC Live. Again, he is Chris. I am Wes. We are, as always, presented by Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans, ClintHammond.com, 803-422-6797, NMLS number 71597. At this point, y'all know the drill. If you're buying a home, just call Clint. Simple and easy as that. Chris, I knew that it had been pure dominance by Missouri in recent years. Beamer framed it up perfectly today.
He had the receipts. Not in a good way.
Not in a good way. And for those who missed it, basically, and I think every coach has these kind of details they circle for any game. Muschamp had them as well. The 6 keys to victory for any game South Carolina plays. The Gamecocks have played Missouri 3 times under Shane Beamer. So that's 18 keys across those 3 games. South Carolina has won 3 of those keys across those 3 games. And as Beamer said, like he wasn't even taking any type of victory lap on those 3 that they won. He was like, well, one of them was we won the 4th quarter. We were down big. So I thought that kind of like why has South Carolina lost to Missouri in recent years? Missouri has just played, honestly, frankly, give them credit, way better.
Yep, they have. So the 2 other things, so you mentioned the 3, Wes. One of them, they won the 4th quarter scoring margin, but they were down, as you mentioned that Shane Beamer said. The other one was, he said, we did, I guess, a decent job of stopping the run in terms of yards per carry. And then another game, they had less penalties, right? And we all know, having fewer penalties in a team, if that's the metric you're going off of, that's not always a great indicator, right? If you have a ton of penalties in a game, big disparity, hurtful procedural penalties, a bunch of 15-yarders, those things can hurt. We've seen South Carolina lose a game where penalties factored in a big way this year, right? But not a great indicator. So out of those 18 data points, 3 times South Carolina got them done. And really, they didn't really get it done in a way that was meaningful, right? Because Missouri won so many of the other ones. And Wes, this actually, when Beamer was talking about this today, it reminded me of the talk going into the LSU game. Now, what does that have to do with anything? Well, Blake Baker, who was at LSU, was Eli Drinkwitz's coordinator for 2, if I'm not mistaken, of those 3 games where Missouri played against South Carolina. And so Beamer went into some other, he wasn't talking about Missouri at that point in terms of those 18 data points, but he was primarily talking about, hey, offensively against Blake Baker and his defenses, we haven't done so hot, right? And he came with some receipts on the amount of sacks that South Carolina had given up against Blake Baker's defenses, right? Now, Blake Baker's not there anymore. He's at LSU. South Carolina actually played pretty well offensively against Blake Baker's LSU Tigers defense earlier this season, even though they lost. But still, some of the same things are there, right? Missouri still has some guys on defense that can get after you. They still have an offensive style that has given South Carolina some fits over the last 3 years. And here's one thing that I think you mentioned, Wes, new challenges every week. Ole Miss has a really good receiving core, and there are other good receivers that South Carolina's played. But these two guys that South Carolina's going to play, and I don't want to limit it to just two, but Theo Weiss, Luther Burden from Missouri, this is going to be one of the biggest challenges in terms of just matching up with receivers one-on-one and tackling them in the open field that South Carolina's faced. So you get a reprieve in some ways if Brady Cook doesn't play. Their starting center is definitely out. But in others, look, you're just going to have to go out and break these trends that have been so harmful in trying to beat Missouri these last few seasons. And the streak overall is at 5, Wes.
Yeah, I was trying to go through them in my head, Chris. Do we know? So win the fourth quarter, penalties, which I don't even think I realized penalties was one. So he mentioned them holding them to a certain
yards per carry.
Is that just win the rushing battle, or is that?
I think it's something like hold the opponent under X amount yards per carry. Like, and I'm not saying this is it. 3.5 yards per carry. Like, you want to look at the game and say, we held them to 3.3 yards per carry. I don't know what the exact number is, but that's what the benchmark is.
I got to imagine there's the reciprocal to that on there, which is run the ball over a certain yard. Because he has said broadly, I remember him saying, hey, run the ball, stop the run. That's one of our keys to victory. Win the explosives, I'm almost positive is one.
This is weird, man. You know how I just said I wasn't saying that was the correct number, but in 2022, Carolina held Missouri to 3.3 yards per carry. I just kind of guessed that number. So that might have been it if that's their number. I'd go back and look at the other games. Missouri didn't run the ball great in that game. I mean, they had 143 yards. But that was the game, Wes, where you credit you after the game. You just said Missouri just played their game and kind of said, this is what we're doing. We're going to play defense, throw it sideways, run the ball a little bit. Problem for South Carolina in that 2022 game, they weren't very explosive. They had a pick, and they ran the ball for 1.4 yards per rush. Said 32 rushing yards in the game. That's not going to get it done.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That hurts to even think about.
It does.
32 rushing yards. Different Gamecock team, obviously, and I think for Carolina, you've got to just hope what you've done all year long is going to hold up against yet another test. And Travis brings up the outside zone. Missouri has been running this stretch zone play for as long as I can remember. And, that's kind of the bread and butter of what Eli Drinkowitz and kind of his offense and what they want to be, what they want to do. And I think safe to say they kind of build their entire offensive identity off of that. So that's kind of where they start, and then they build out the rest of what they're trying to do from there. And, I think there are some takeaways here from the way Carolina was able to really take away what Vandy wanted to do. Remember all the discussion about Vandy and their offensive scheme and how they did a couple of things and they just built from there against Alabama, and they were really, really good against the Crimson Tide. You look at Vandy and kind of their base stuff against Carolina was not there. Even if you look at the total yardage in this game last week, you may go, all right, Vandy had a little success running the ball. They had a little success moving the ball. Then you dive into it, and you're really saying, well, Pavia on scramble plays had almost all of the rushing yardage. I mean, Vandy had, I think, 15 carries for 43 yards from their running backs, Chris. The longest run from their running backs was 7 yards. 7. Yeah. So in terms of just, hey, we're trying to stay ahead of schedule. We're trying to, run the ball inside and then build to our outside runs off of that, build to all these different looks Vandy wants to give you. Your base play really has to be there to an extent before your complementary plays will even work. And, I know I'm getting back into Vandy, but I promise we're going to move this forward here in a second. It's a different scheme, probably different little techniques to stop it. But the sort of global point holds true. If you can kind of stop the success of this stretch zone play that Missouri bases everything off of, you in some ways will stop everything else that they do to an extent by taking that away, I think.
Yeah, and not to go back to Vandy, but just there is a point from that game. If you go back and look at the success that they did have, Wes, they had the one touchdown drive. I remember we were watching at the radio station today, the SEC in 60, kind of the extended highlights. We're up there watching, man, this one drive. It was mostly like plays that had broken down, and Pavi is just making a great throw to the outside. You have a running back making a catch, diving backwards in between two defenders, right? Vandy couldn't line up and run triple option stuff on South Carolina all night and eat the clock. They didn't have success. When they had success, it was Pavia being Pavia. So let's bring that forward. What do we know Missouri wants to do? And particularly if Brady Cook's not in the game and it's Drew Pine, which Drew Pine did make some plays against Oklahoma, to his credit. Made more plays than I anticipated with his legs, actually. They want to get the ball horizontally and vertically to Burden and Weiss. And they want to run that stretch play, right? They want to be able to run the football. So if you're the Gamecocks, you're looking at this thing, Clayton White, Shane Beamer, that staff, they're looking at this thing going, we know who's if we're going to get beat, we're making Drew Pine at quarterback beat us, right? We're going to force him to make a series of great plays. We're going to force Luther Burden and Theo Weiss to make those acrobatic, incredible catches, which they may do at times in the game because they're very talented. You don't want this team to line up, run the football on you, be able to just have time to throw it horizontally. You got to be able to, Beamer mentioned, Wes, tackling is going to be huge because they're going to take some safe, easy throws at times, and then they're going to take shots downfield. So I think that has been a key in this 3-game stretch for South Carolina, is just getting other teams out of sorts and not letting them do what they really want to do. And so can South Carolina do that against Missouri on Saturday?
Yeah, and we'll all find out, obviously. I mean, Arizona Gamecock basically says Pavia sucks. Dude, and I'm not saying he's some NFL quarterback. He doesn't have the arm strength or the size to be that, in my opinion. But, dude, Vandy would be probably a 2-win team without that kid.
Yeah.
Look at what they were last year. Like, I mean, and I know they added some other guys too. They also lost a lot of guys to the portal from last year's team. So I can't get on board with the Pavia sucks. Like, that dude's a warrior. Nobody here has said he's going to be a first-round draft pick. So let's get that. Let's get that out of the way. But I mean, watch how much of their offense was just him improvising. And I mean, what he did to Alabama will still go down as one of the most, I would say, surprising outcomes in the history of modern football, in my opinion. So anyway, we don't have to keep talking about Pavia, but I'll give credit where it's due. That guy was getting harassed for about 60 minutes straight and still somehow gave them a fighter's chance in the game. Anyway, moving forward. Chris, I think to your point and to Beamer's point, and something I wrote about today too, like every game you do circle, if you're in the SEC, you circle, hey, here are a couple things they're going to do. They're going to give us trouble. And then you try to do everything in your power to take it away. And so those two receivers, like, they're about as good of a duo as you're going to see in this league, I think. And I think the place that Luther Burden really gives you trouble is that you have to be so aware of all the different ways that they will use him. And, motion, jet sweep in the backfield. They tried to get him the ball on a 4th and 1. They got kind of creative, ran sideline to sideline. Oklahoma defense was having none of it. I do think, to me, you saw a little. Now, Pine made some plays in the fourth quarter. Some of that was those two receivers. I don't want to say bailing him out, but just making some outstanding plays for him. I mean, the big touchdown catch down the sideline by Burden was just him making it, or that set. Did he score on that play or it set up a touchdown? I don't remember. But Burden was, I mean, the way he contorted his body and spun around, and just those guys are great players. And so I think for them, you look and Pine, not the biggest guy in the world, like not the tallest, kind of sneaky athleticism, you would say, but not a huge, not a great runner. That Oklahoma defense and what they were able to do for most of that game is actually a pretty decent comparison to what we see from South Carolina's defense this year in terms of just pass rush ability, speed, ability to be disruptive. I do think there's some carryover. And if you watch that game last week with Missouri and Oklahoma, the final score is no indication whatsoever of how that game actually played out. Like, for most of that game, it was a punt and field goal fest. And that's honestly maybe even being a little bit positive. Like, it was ugly on offense for both sides. Yep. And, so I think the real question, one, is there any chance they get Brady Cook back this week? That changes for me the dynamic of this game a little bit. If they do, and if he's anywhere close to actually, being 100%.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I don't know. We'll find out, I think, soon, probably. But what was kind of circulating last week, even before Missouri played Oklahoma West, kind of painted a negative picture about Cook playing on Saturday. So I'm kind of going into it thinking it'll be Drew Pine, but you never know. But Cook is a guy that has played a lot of football. He's played a lot of good football for Missouri. Certainly he's played well against South Carolina in the past. And so you'd much rather face the backup quarterback, right? I think, totally agree and mention it as well. Your point about Weiss and Burden, those guys are just dangerous. But I think there's a real concern on the Missouri side. Without Cook, they've had trouble scoring. And that was such, you look at the box score of that game. Oh, Missouri scored 30 points. One of them was on a defensive score. It was just an incredibly weird game. I mean, wasn't that thing like a 10-10 game, like in the late third quarter or something? I mean, it was
like
weird,
10-9. It was like 10-9, I think, at the end of the third. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, like going into the fourth quarter, weird game. So definitely not as much offense as you would think, just sitting there looking at the scoreboard at the end of the game. So, if you're Missouri, that doesn't necessarily bode well when you're going against the South Carolina defense that has feasted lately, right? But there's still some challenges in facing this team. And I think in all three phases of the game, Burden's a guy who's a weapon on special teams. And South Carolina's had a lot of trouble against Missouri, to be quite frank. Wes, the two other things that stand out from what Beamer said when you're thinking about South Carolina's offense against Missouri's defense. He did give the stats that you mentioned to open the show about, all the 6 different keys every year, and they've lost all but 3 of them and lost 3 games since he's been here. But he also said, quite frankly, we've gotten our butts whooped physically and our butts kicked, whatever it was. And so you could sense throughout this week, Shane Beamer's going to challenge this team. And not that this team needs a lot of motivation. If you're to ask me my opinion on this defense and this team, and if you just ask me to sum it up in one word right now, I'd say hungry, right? That is how they act. That's how they conduct themselves. Kyle Kennard, Demetrius Knight, Debo Williams, all these guys, right? I mean, you could go through the lot of the guys. They don't need a lot of motivation, but they're also going to be hearing this week, I think, this is a team that's physically been better. We'll go back and look at the past few weeks for this Gamecock defense. They have physically been better. And in the past 2 weeks, offensively, you look at what South Carolina started to do in the run game against Texas A&M. You look at what they did against Vanderbilt, where now it's whole. It's all 3 phases. South Carolina looks like they're the ones that are in control, right? They look like they're the team that's more physical. And so that's exactly what you need. And one other thing, and this relates to the physicality, Beamer mentioned it all stems from a lack of ability to run the ball. I gave the stat that blew your mind earlier that in the 2022 game, South Carolina finished with 32 rushing yards. Wes, in the other 2 games, it has not been much better. 2021, Gamecocks rushed for 57 yards. Last year, the Gamecocks rushed for 69 yards. So you're talking about 3 straight seasons where you didn't even eclipse 70 yards rushing. You're not going to win games that way. So you got to take what you've been doing the past couple weeks for this Gamecock offense, the O-line, Rocket Sanders, Lenoris. You got to go out and run the football in this game and have success with it.
I just had flashbacks to Carolina against A&M for a number of years before they so now they've won 2 out of the last 3 and really competed last year against A&M. It felt like for a stretch, they just had no ability whatsoever to match up with A&M physically. Like from a physicality standpoint, cannot run the ball at all. You got no shot of winning those games, as you said. Then it's kind of turned the last few years, and certainly this year took a major jump in Carolina's favor. Some of that, you just got better players than you did at some of those positions now. And I wonder, can Carolina sort of turn the script on Missouri, much like they have some of these other teams in recent memory, Chris? Now it's Carolina with the defensive front that creates havoc on everybody they play. Now it's Carolina with the offensive line that, at least in recent games, has been able to establish their will up front. And I wonder, what does that stretch zone look like if you've got guys just blowing it up at the point of attack? Like the beauty of that stretch zone is when you can set that edge and when you can capture that edge, when they're really good at it. We've seen them, how they kind of bend it. Like you don't even know when they call it, they have no idea where the running back's actually going to end up, right? Because there's so many different avenues that he's able to read and cut the ball back to. And it's not old school football where you're just looking for a particular point of attack. It's more, hey, you're reading these angles, you're reading where the defenders are, and you're either getting wider, you're cutting it directly upfield, or you're even cutting it back because it's such a wide angle that zone takes. And so for me, if you have a Dylan Stewart, a Kyle Kennard, a TJ Sanders just knifing into the backfield against this thing, what does that do to just blow it up? I wonder, is this a game where you have to be a little bit more technically sound if you're South Carolina and sort of say, look, we're just going to set the edge and play this thing kind of the way traditional football would tell you have to? Or is Carolina able to still just be their aggressive selves and just say, we're going bull in a china shop on this thing. Let's just blow it the heck up. They may hit one or two on us, but over the course of this game, we're going to put them in enough 2nd and 12s, 3rd and 8s that we're going to feel good about it from a defensive standpoint.
Yeah, and it seemed, Wes, that they've been aggressive against others, right? And I mean, you think about Vandy, the way they administer their offense, a lot of their plays just got blown up before they had a chance to get started. There was a lot of post-snap movement, offensive linemen moving, post-snap motions, and often after the ball snaps, there's a South Carolina defender or two there before everybody can kind of get to their spot. Cole Kubelik pointed out that I think is a little bit of a paraphrase, but he uses the numbers. So 0 and 17, Debo Williams and Demetrius Knight are a problem on run throughs, right? So that's one thing that they're really adept at. Debo, D Knight, they're fast. They're coming with bad intentions. They're going to crash through the line and wreak some havoc before you can even really set your play up, right? So when you are thinking about that outside zone that's a little bit more slow developing, can Carolina, wreck shop on some of those early before they have a chance to get started? And then you kind of go game within the game schematically. Can Missouri use that aggressiveness, if that's the route USC chooses, against the Gamecocks at times? So I think there is a fascinating schematic battle here too, as far as how Missouri decides to administer their offense against Carolina's defense.
Yeah, for sure. Before we go any further, let us tell you about our friend Andy Luedecke at My Perfect Franchise. Find your perfect franchise by heading on over to myperfectfranchise.net. Contact Andy today. You can call him or text him 404-973-9901 or just shoot him an email, Andy at myperfectfranchise.net. If you're ready to leave the corporate rat race for the American dream, maybe looking for a side hustle while still working your current job, or you want to diversify, build wealth, leave a legacy, Andy can help you do just that because he is a franchise consultant and owner, and he helps people find franchises that will fit their skill sets, financial requirements, time to commit, and more. The best part about it for you is that his services are 100% free. He is here to help you every step of the way when it comes to business ownership. Again, that phone number, 404-973-9901. That's 404-973-9901. Chris Clark, any other details from what Shane Beamer had to say today that caught your attention?
I think I mentioned most of mine, Wes. Well, here, as far as what happened in the past against Missouri and some kind of early keys for this year, the injury front. That's maybe the other thing that caught my attention. Optimistic Beamer said that they'll get DeAndre Jules back. To me, would be significant. If he is as close to fully healthy as possible, this is a defensive line that is still playing very hard and playing very well. Little dinged up. Vandy cut blocking. You had really all your starters at one point or another, were down in that game. They all came back. They're all fine. But you would love to get Jules back to be able to give you some quality snaps in the middle. So that's something to watch out for that could be, I think, a boost. Left tackle, Wes, that's another area. In the past, Missouri not only made it hard on the Gamecocks to run the football, they have really rushed the passer well. Now you have Lenore Sellers this year. That helps. But he mentioned that if Josiah Thompson plays, he's probably not going to be 100%. So it kind of seems like, Wes, we should prepare to see a good bit of Tree Babalade, who I thought, played well last week when he came in.
Yeah, he did. And I think our eyes told us that. I think PFF told us that. Staff gave him one of the Offensive Player of the Week awards. So I took that answer to mean the same thing, man. Like they feel really good about both those guys. But if Josiah is not really close to 100%, maybe just roll Tree right back on out there. So Coleman says, is Mizzou down an offensive lineman? Yes, they're starting center. He is out. Chris, is he out for a while? Is that right?
Their center?
Yeah.
He's out for the year. Yeah, he's out for the year.
Yeah, definitely hate that for him. He's a guy that has played really a lot for them and will be a loss, one would imagine, on that front. We had a question earlier, Chris, about how does this defense compare to all the defenses that every other Gamecock defense is compared to? And that's those defenses, obviously, with Ellis Johnson and then Lorenzo Ward during the 3-11-win seasons. Where are you at on that right now?
That's something where I feel like I'd have to like commission a study on it and go back and need to go watch those games, and you need to go like, I always say the 2012 Gamecock football team, the entire team, is the best team in school history. Best team since I've been covering the program, following things for sure. An absolute shame that team had 2 losses, both on the road, LSU, Florida, barely got left out of the SEC title game. That team was good enough to win the SEC if they made it to Atlanta. They were good enough to honestly probably win a national title. Like, they were really good, just missed out. Always will be a big what if. I mean, Wes, I don't know if I can give a definitive answer. I think it's in play as being the best, Even that 2012 team, they gave up 35 points at home, to Tennessee in the game where Marcus Lattimore, so there's, I don't know. I do think it's 2 different eras too, right? So you're over 10 years, coming up on 15 years. Offenses are even more explosive now, of course. I think one thing that stands out about this team is their linebackers. The athleticism and the speed that they have at linebacker really, really stands out. I think that position is probably better, one of the best that we've seen in a while in terms of talent plus depth. And, man, you got to say the defensive front is at least close, right? I don't know. Where do you land on it?
I'm just trying not to be a prisoner of the moment on this thing. But, and somebody who has done the research can correct me if I'm wrong, and I will, if the numbers disagree, then I may change my mind. This is just off the cuff. I feel like this group may be better and deeper. And this group feels faster to me.
Yes.
And I think, agree 100% on linebacker. They're just more athletic there, faster there. And I think this defense is more aggressive, like stylistically in how they go about their business. And to me, that's just very fun to watch. Like, it's fun to watch and not know on a 3rd and long, are they bailing and dropping everybody back, or are they going to rush 6 and, and everything in between. And so, obviously, when you watch a team all season long and it's fresh in your memory, you're going to see it a little bit differently than you did 10, 15 years ago.
Yep.
But, man, we got to give this current group their due. Like, they are legitimately special. And, even the numbers, like you said, are going to be skewed a little bit based on what era you're in. So I think you got to compare it to, like, go back. It wouldn't necessarily be as simple as, like, which one gave up the most yards per game, which one gave up the most points per game. It would have to be compared to everybody else in the league that particular year.
Yep.
I feel like. So will this one have more NFL players? I believe so.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll do the same thing. I'll say the same thing you just said. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. A while back, I was asked about South Carolina's record number of drafted players, just overall. You know, how many players were? What's the high water mark? And I think that number was 7, maybe 8. I think it was 7. And so I was asked a while back, can Carolina break that? And I said I thought so. And the majority of those, overwhelming majority probably, is on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, they have several guys who not only could, but should hear their names called. So very, very talented group, deep group, like you said.
If you start to add up how many guys are going to be drafted from this defense, like not just this year too, like eventually, like this is going to be one of those things where we look back and we're like, holy cow.
Yeah.
You know, because then you gotta wait a couple of years, and Dylan may be number 1 overall pick before it's over.
Yeah, it'll be like when we flashed that graphic that was put up on the CBS game of 2010 Bama. You get there and there. I got played in the league. That guy played. Yeah, it's going to be that.
I mean, watch, dude. Before it's over, Judge Collier is going to be talked about as a draft guy. If Vicari keeps improving, Vicari athletically is going to be a draft guy. Did you see that video of him cutting that backflip in the end zone?
Yeah.
In full pads and getting Lord knows how much air under him. Just a freak athlete, dude. And I think for Carolina, this is not quite our current topic, but you're going to have a lot of ammo on the recruiting trail for the way you've helped. And I'm not taking anything away from the players themselves. They've obviously worked very hard. But the way you've helped Kyle Kennard along, I mean, Kyle Kennard himself, one of the 2 or 3 things he says when he says, how have you progressed so much? Sterling Lucas. Look at the job they've done with him. Look at the job they've done with D Knight at linebacker. Look at the job they've done. You know, the secondary guys aren't transfers, but developing them along the way. I mean, this is starting your safeties and corners were not even super highly rated guys out of high school.
Mm-hmm.
And you have developed them. So I don't know. It's going to be fascinating to look back on this defense and see just how many guys are drafted, how many guys find their way into the league, and then how many guys stick once they get there. Because you do have a lot of good traits among that group that are what you would call like professional intangibles, I feel like, in terms of doing things the right way, being good leaders, carrying themselves the right way off the field, and all those things too.
Yeah.
Did we lose you, Chris?
Kyle Kennard, D Knight, Tonka. These guys been around the game a while, and some of them already have families. Wes, I mean, they are just grown men, and so they conduct themselves very well, and I think that's going to serve them well at the next level in addition to their talent.
Yep, no doubt, man. All right, dude. I think I'm good for the day. What about you? All right, we're having technical difficulties. I don't know if it's me or if it's Chris, but we're going to hop on off here. And by the way, be on the lookout tonight. College football playoff. Gamecocks should be in the top 25. We'll see what that looks like. And of course, we'll have reaction on Gamecock Central. Chris and I will be back on Thursday. Once again, Lord willing, we're going to have Connor Shaw. That's the plan. Connor will be with us at BP Skinner live at 2 o'clock as we break down our final thoughts, final preview on South Carolina versus Missouri. So, all right, y'all. That's it for today. For Chris, I'm Wes. Shout out again, of course, Clint Hammond, ClintHammond.com. Y'all have a good one.